This video illustrates a method that I've developed using Photoshop to help enhance the content of petrographs and pictographs. The term petroglyph refers to rock art that has been chiseled away or picked out of a rock surface. The term pictograph refers to those pieces of art which have been painted onto a rock surface. The enhancement technique I'm going to show here can be used both for petroglyphs and for pictographs. In many cases, using an enhancement reveals all sorts of detail which absolutely is not visible when one is looking at it with the naked eye. This is a technique that I've been developing over the last few years to help enhance ghost signs, the old painted ads on buildings, so that I can bring out both the information that's on the building and also to reveal hidden layers that are underneath. I'm not going to give a full photography course here, but there's one piece of information that you have to be aware of when photographing petroglyphs. That is, always use raw imaging mode or an uncompressed TIFF mode. The JPEG format, which iPhones and everything else usually defaults to, produces heavily compressed images which throw away a lot of detail. They don't take much disk space and are really great for uploading to the cloud, but when you actually start enhancing these things, they end up with basically a lot of blocky artifacts that make the actual content of the resulting petroglyphs very iffy as far as their interpretation. So please use raw or uncompressed TIFF. So just like I'm not giving you a full photography course, I'm also not going to discuss all the details running Photoshop. I'm just going to show the steps that I use to do the enhancement. You should already know how to open files, close files, save files, all the basic things one does with Photoshop. So once I've opened up a Photoshop file, I go through and the first thing I do is duplicate a layer. I do duplicate layers a lot just to save what I'm doing. Then I run a thing called shadows and highlights. I set the radius all the way to the maximum for this, then adjust the highlights and the shadows so that it takes out all of sort of the overall shading due to shadows, due to various sort of colors on the rock that are much larger than the detail I want to enhance. This is pretty subjective what one wants to do. There's no correct answer for doing this, so just mess around for a little while and then push OK and it'll do it. And when I compare the result with the previous one, you can see particularly the lighter area at the bottom, which has now been evened out. Just as before, I duplicate the layer just so I have one that I can work with. Now I do the first enhancement. What I do is I go to each of the individual channels, the blue, green, and red, and I run a very extreme contrast stretch on a thing called equalize, which technically just spreads the histogram evenly across the entire range. You don't really need to know what the details are, just know that it's something you generally would not use on an image except for an effect. And in fact, that is kind of what we're doing here, is get an effect which is to emphasize the colors in the original image as much as possible. If you look at this, it's kind of actually fun. Look at this, graffiti from 1884. Here's one from 10/25/1902. I guess people have been doing this as far back as these things have been drawn. And just as before, the next thing I do is to duplicate the layer. Okay, now here comes the magic trick. What I do is I go to that new layer. You can see the RG and B, blue, green, and red in here. What I do is, I'm going to go ahead in this example, take and invert the red layer so it becomes a negative. Now the color is even more bizarre. But when you go to the black and white, it presents you with a series of 6 different sliders that can be adjusted. What this is doing is subtracting and adding various colors to each other, color differencing. And by doing so, one can eliminate some colors and bring out a lot of detail. And you can see in this example, I'm bringing out the Barrier Canyon art, keeping everything else hidden. So by sliding these things around, there's no correct answer. You just have to go through and try to maximize the amount of detail. Being able to slide these things around is actually a great tool for a researcher, because there's a lot of fine detail that really requires a bunch of different settings to be able to go through and see what's there. So just sort of looking at that, and that's nice. Now I'm going to go through again, and I'm going to do a different one. Now, if there were no color in this, if this were an original black and white, all these sliders would do absolutely nothing but reveal gray layers. The reason this works is because there are color differences, and this really amplifies those differences to the extreme by doing the differences. So by doing this, one can, in this case now I've isolated out just the petroglyph instead of the pictograph parts of the image, and adjust a little bit and try to get rid of even the texture on the background rocks. You can usually get rid of cracks and all the other additional things that may interfere with the image. So for this example, I inverted the red channel only. You can easily go through, and in fact I encourage also doing the green and the blue separately. They produce very different results depending on the content of the original image. You can also take the various results from the different channels, from inverting the red, green, and blue, and then recombine them with the original using various techniques such as multiply, difference, exclusion, brightness, etc. And all of those can produce some pretty amazing images.